Hi folks, welcome back to Center for Lit. Adam Andrews here. Today I want to talk about what it means to teach literature classically. It's a term that is all the rage these days and it really raises as many questions as it answers, because to teach literature classically, you got to know what classical actually means. And I think it's important to understand that we, as the members of the classical education movement, really use the word in two separate senses. And you should understand what these senses are. First of all, the word classical refers to a curriculum. It refers to a commitment to a set of books, a commitment to a particular literary and cultural tradition, maybe the Western tradition or the great books tradition. It includes a respect for the old epics and the old classical works of antiquity, a respect for the great medieval works of literature, a respect for authors like Shakespeare and Dickens. Down deep, though, this idea of classical is a respect for what is great and eternal and lasting and universal in terms of content, in terms of curriculum. So at Center for Lit, we use the great books term to refer to a lot of the stuff that we're doing. We're a great books organization. We're interested in the best that has been thought or said by men in all times and places. That's what we mean by classical. At least that's one of the senses. And so to teach literature classically is to have a respect for the great books, to teach our kids to love them, to learn to read them well, and to hold them close to their breast, as has the rest of human civilization since its beginnings. Classical. However, we also use the word in a related sense that's just as important, although very distinct. And that is to refer to the stages of human development, the stages that a student goes through as he ages and matures, and that change how he interacts with the world around him. And we get this idea of classical from Dorothy Sayers, who wrote an important work on the subject back in the early 20th century. And she refers to three stages: a grammar stage, a logic stage, and a rhetoric stage. And a lot of the times when we refer to teaching classically, we mean teaching through these stages of whatever subject we are approaching. Real quickly, the grammar stage is a stage early in a student's life where he's very good at memorizing details and grabbing the bits and pieces of something and cramming them into his head. The logic stage is as he grows up a little bit, he starts to see how those details relate to one another. He forms connections. He forms causal relationships in his mind. He sees how one thing leads to another and how they all form a part of a larger whole. Logic stage students are also argumentative, and they want to wrestle with these connections and wrestle with how they fit together. And finally, the rhetoric stage, which is achieved or reached as the student gets even older, is where he begins to put all of these details into the expression of ideas, the interaction of one set of ideas with another, worldview type debates and analysis. The rhetoric student learns to express himself with grace and eloquence and power. And as a student moves through these stages, from the grammar stage to the logic stage to the rhetoric stage, different exercises, different kinds of activities, academically speaking, are appropriate for his age and his stage in the process. So we use the term classical to refer to moving through these particular stages of human development and having that be reflected in our teaching, in our pedagogy, you might say. At Center for Lit, we actually use the term classical in a third related sense, and I think that's really important. And that is to refer not only to the ages of the student, grammar, logic, rhetoric, as labels for developmental stages, but also stages of the reading process, stages of the literary process. No matter how old you are, it's necessary to move through the grammar and logic and rhetoric stages of understanding a work of literature in order to do it justice. If a work of literature is new to you, you begin understanding it by assembling the various details, by going through the grammar stage, as it were. Even as a 53-year-old man, you got to understand the vocabulary of the story. You got to understand the elements of characterization and setting and plot and conflict and climax and denouement and falling action, right? You have to understand all of these and identify them and put them in the right categories. You also need to move through the logic stage. You got to understand how these pieces fit together. How does rising action lead on to climax? How does setting underscore universal theme? The logic stage of reading is necessary for all of us to participate in. And then finally, the rhetoric stage, where the mature reader, having understood the grammar and the logic of a work of literature, begins to express his own interpretation of the work and have it interact with his interpretation of other works in the field or other works in other fields, to see the work as a as an entry, as a participation, as a salvo in a great conversation about ideas and about human nature and about the relationship between God and man in the world. This is the rhetoric stage of reading. Now, students of any age move through the grammar and the logic and the rhetoric stages of any book, regardless of its reading level. And to teach literature classically is to teach this way, to lead students in a step-by-step progression through the grammar and the logic and the rhetoric stages of reading. So we really combine all three of the senses of classical at Center for Lit when we speak of teaching literature classically. A respect for the great tradition of which we are the heirs, an acknowledgement of a student's developmental stages, that young kids are at the grammar stage and high school kids might be at the rhetoric stage, and then a commitment to leading every reader through these three stages with every book in order. I hope this has been helpful, encouraging, enlightening. Please comment below and join us next time for another walk down literary lane.